For 30 years, everyone thought Roy Orbison's heart just failed. However, disclosed medical records present a different picture. Months before he passed away, his physicians realized something wasn't right. They discovered residues of compounds that were not supposed to be there. Music wasn't the focus of his most recent recording session. He was gathering proof of what actually transpired with his family. His 2 sons were killed in a fire that wasn't an accident. Someone wanted Roy silenced because he had proof. You'll be shocked by what he learned about that fateful night. Who actually killed the Orbison family is revealed in the recording he left behind. In the midst of the Dust Bowl, when families were struggling to make ends meet every day, Roy Kelton Orbison was born on April 23, 1936, at 3:30 in the afternoon in Vernon, Texas. His parents, Orby Lee and Nain Schultz Orbison, were often on the road due to their jobs and lived in a modest home. Roy's early memories were influenced by the sound of engines in country music, since Orby worked as a garage mechanic and an oil well driller. Dust storms and long, silent evenings characterized Vernon's harshness. However, he felt a spark ignite inside that small dwelling. Roy requested a harp at 6. Instead, after dark, his father gave him a guitar and taught him some basic chords. That guitar remained with him and influenced the course he would take for the remainder of his life when the day eventually slowed down. Roy's appetite for music increased as he developed. He was already memorizing the tunes Orby performed at family get-togethers at Music 6. By 8, Roy was singing Hank Williams hits like Lovesick Blues in front of a microphone at the Vernon radio station KVWC. Every penny he made, which was typically only enough for school supplies, meant the world to a family still struggling with the effects of the Great Depression. Neighbors who listened to that radio program began to talk about the child with a powerful voice since his voice sounded older than he actually was. He gradually started writing songs as well, putting his emotions to the test on paper before releasing them to the world. Then something even more significant occurred. He got a weekly position on KVWC at the age of 8. He gained his own show every Saturday after winning a radio contest when he was 9 years old. He was sitting outside his grandmother's house at the time, writing his debut song, A Vow of Love. He participated in a talent competition related to a traveling medicine show in 1946. He tied for first place while singing Joel Blonde in Mountain Dew. $15 was the prize. Roy offered his friend who had brought his guitar half of his $7.50. Even before his name became well known, that little deed revealed who he was. Then life changed once more. The family relocated to Wink, Texas, in 1946. Orby was drawn there by work in the oil fields, and the town didn't resemble Vernon at all. Wink was lonely, little, and dry. Later, Roy said that it was sand, oil, grease, football, and oil fields. Nothing warm, nothing tender. The peaceful stillness surrounding Wink produced the lonely sound that would eventually reverberate through his lyrics, as the environment seeped into him. He started his first band, the Wink Westerners, at the age of 13. The boys eventually performed at local honky-tonks after practicing swing and country music. In nearby Kermit, Texas, they even had a weekly show on Curve. Slowly, money began to flow in. Roy, music, made $400 at one dance, which was a significant sum for a youngster in the 1940s, and every performance strengthened his conviction that music might be the answer. But then he experienced an unforgettable anguish from life. Roy's mother, Nain, passed away unexpectedly from a respiratory disease in 1953 when Roy was just 17 years old. He was crushed by the loss. Wink already felt alone. And now he had lost the anchor. In order to support his father, Roy took on odd occupations, such as pumping gas till late at night. He was pushed inward by grief. He turned what he experienced into song. Every inquiry, every bit of loneliness, every hurt. Later, such feelings were expressed in his ballads, which caused everyone to pause and pay attention. Thinking he might need a fallback option, he enrolled in North Texas State College in Denton in 1954 to study geology. Geology, however, did not hold him. It was music. He changed to English and history a year later. He kept the Wink Westerners alive while in college by playing with Dick Penner, W.D.E. Moore, and Billy Pat, Music, Ellis. They performed at fraternity gatherings and wrote tunes. They recorded Ooby Dooby in Jim Beck's Dallas studio in 1955. The new rockabilly sound, music, at Sun Records served as inspiration. Roy became aware of the reality when the song became a local smash. Music was no longer a pipe fantasy. It was a path forward. After just one semester at North Texas State, he transferred to Odessa Junior College. He founded the Teen Kings there, and they quickly won a talent competition that led to a TV appearance on KMID in Midland. He was driven toward Memphis by that momentum. After Papa Hollifield, the owner of a record store, played Ooby Dooby to Sam Phillips on the phone, the Teen Kings went to Music, Sun Records for an audition in April 1956. After hearing what he thought was good, Phillips invited them to Sunday. A few months after they re-recorded the song on March 19, 1956, it rose to number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100. About 200,000 copies were sold. Roy experienced his first taste of national success. However, there were fissures behind the growth. Roy desired to record poignant ballads. Phillips desired rockabilly speed. Their visions were at odds. Subsequent singles did not chart. Roy was only at Sun for 7 months when the Teen Kings disbanded at the end of 1956. Frustration then became more audible. Roy fought royalties conflicts, arguing that Phillips was deducting excessive amounts from his earnings, a complaint that many Sun artists voiced at the time. The Teen Kings were finished by December 1956, and Roy eventually left his son. He even briefly considered following in his father's footsteps and working in the oil fields. When Claudette, a song he penned for his wife, was included as the B-side to the Everly Brothers hit tune All I Have to Do Is Dream, however, music drew him back. In 1959, it peaked at number 30. He bought a pink Cadillac with the earnings, squandered it all too quickly, and wound up poor once more, living in Wink with his parents. Nevertheless, Claudette signaled a change. It demonstrated his ability to write hits and stay in business. He signed with Alf Rose in Nashville in 1957. Wesley Rose encouraged him to pursue songwriting and publishing because he had faith in him. Roy was able to buy out his Sun contract thanks to such support. He even performed as Johnny Cash's opening act at the Grand Ole Opry, a performance that propelled his music out of the Texas struggle and into the core of country music. He went on a Southern honky-tonk tour in 1958 with Johnny Cash and the Wink Westerners. Every night, crowds yelled for boisterous music, music. However, everyone stopped talking and paid attention when Roy took the stage for an encore and let loose his 3-octave voice. He was drawn towards something greater by that voice. Then there was more trouble. Roy discovered that his manager had been embezzling tour funds. He was almost destroyed by the revelation. With just enough to get by, Roy returned to Nashville and accepted jobs performing in demos to make ends meet. He was terribly shaken by betrayal, but it made him, music, reconsider everything. He eventually discovered his own sound at Monument Records as a result of it. The one that made him a legend by carrying simply the song Lonely and all the others. In 1959, Roy Orbison joined Monument Records, having more optimism than assurance. But as soon as Fred Foster heard Uptown, something changed in the music. The strings rising behind his falsetto gave the music a sort of slow burn and ominous weight. And it opened a door, despite the fact that it only peaked at number 72 on the Billboard in late 1960. The B-side was where the real spark sat. When Only the Lonely was released in May 1960, it took off. By October, it had risen from number 2 in the US to number 1 in the UK after crossing the water. It was the longest song he ever released to remain on the UK charts for 24 weeks. In the US alone, almost 1 million copies were sold. All of a sudden, this quiet man with a big voice was everywhere. Additionally, the sound he created in the studio raised the standard for pop music. Before they ever knew his name, people could feel that voice. And he started entering rooms he had previously only dreamed of almost overnight. Only the Lonely developed into something more than a hit while the world continued to whirl. By the end of 1961, it had brought Roy's reputation to nations that hardly knew American rock and sold an additional 1 million copies in the US. Every breath has emotion, crescendos, and dramatic strings. It didn't feel like anything you could hear on the radio. Artists paid close attention. He was heard by the Beatles. Those bills were examined by the Beach Boys. That falsetto sounded like Heartbreak Rising, and fans clung to it. The song launched Roy Orbison's rise to prominence in both rock and pop, and it remained on the UK charts for almost 6 months. Someone who, without lifting his hand, could shake the room. He exuded the same type of subdued strength. And that was an accident. He didn't use his prescription, music, spectacles when he performed in 1963. He then put on his normal pair of dark sunglasses for the outdoors. The audience saw something enigmatic rather than uneasy, and he felt less exposed, almost concealed inside the frame. He wore them. They quickly became a part of him. The brightness of those lenses made it possible for people to see him from across a stadium, and the spectacles became just as famous as the voice that reverberated above every stage. While others, like Elvis, shook their hips and moved to the beat, his stillness, music, on stage emanated from the same source. Roy barely moved as he entered the spotlight. Fans watched Blue Angel stand still, wearing all black, and letting his voice do the talking when he debuted in 1961 and rose to number 9. It wasn't a ruse. It wasn't a stance. It was faith in sound alone. His performances turned into times when the room leaned in and the music slowed down. Long after the lights had gone out, some could still remember the sensation. And that silence became his signature. However, life was cracking behind the stage lights. As his touring schedule expanded, his marriage to Claudette Freddie suffered the most. He was hardly at home when he recorded Running Scared, his first #1 song in 1961. The gap widened. He was traveling throughout Britain by 1963. And Claudette began an affair with the contractor constructing their Hendersonville, Tennessee, home because she was lonely and exhausted. Roy was shocked when he learned. The two parted ways in November 1964. Then, in an attempt to restore something, music, that was brittle, they got married again in August 1965, following the birth of their third child. Their marriage's tale demonstrated how a man's life might be subtly torn apart while being elevated to new heights by celebrity. Despite all of this chaos, the music continued to rise. Released in July 1961, Crying became a phenomenon in and of itself. On October 7, 1961, it debuted at #1 on the US Cashbox chart. It also peaked at #2 on Billboard, #25 in the UK, and 3 weeks in a row at the top of the Australian charts in November. More than 8 million copies were sold. A decade later, the flamenco rock sound was influenced by the Spanish guitar solo, which remained in people's memories for years. In 2002, the song received a Grammy Hall Music of Fame honor. Additionally, it was ranked number 69 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 best songs ever in 2010. It was not just a hit. The world opened up. Then came the tour that further cemented his legacy. Roy led a UK tour in May 1963, with the Beatles, a teenage band, serving as his opening act. They were going to take over the world with music, but no one knew it. The tour began in Slough on May 18 and concluded in Blackburn on June 9. 17 dates spread around Scotland, Wales, and England. Roy was the main act at initially, but the Beatles became co-headliners due to their rapid growth. Roy frequently stole the show even back then. The audience at London's Gaumont Cinema yelled as he sang in Dreams, and others backstage questioned how anyone could follow him. John Lennon referred to him as the world's best vocalist. According to Ringo Starr, it was awful to follow Roy since he would always wow the crowd. It's over-elevated him even farther in 1964. It topped the chart for 2 weeks and remained there for a total of 18 weeks, peaking at #9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and #1 in the UK. After disputing with Claudette, Roy captured it in a single take, and the unadulterated intensity rocked the audience. His voice soared, the strings rose, and everything was caught by producer Fred Foster and engineer Bill Porter. Cashbox described it as a pulsating lament from a lover. The emotion in each sentence was commended by Billboard. It turned out to be one of his most popular songs. Oh, Pretty Woman followed. He and Bill Dez wrote it at Roy's house on July 24, 1964, in about 40 minutes. Claudette said that she was leaving. Roy sang the first word of Des' joke, "A pretty woman never needs money." On August 1, Roy and 4 other guitarists recorded the song at Nashville's RCA Studio B. It sold over 7 million copies, became his second #1 single, and peaked at #1 in both the US and the UK in September 1964. Because the bass riff sounded too sexual initially, some radio stations even declined to play it. Despite all of that, it went on to become one of the decade's most popular songs, but not without controversy. Roy acknowledged having groupie encounters while traveling in 1964. Already feeling isolated, Claudette's jealousy, music, intensified until it drove her to commit adultery. In November 1964, while "Oh, Pretty Woman" was at its height, Roy filed for divorce after learning about the affair. The divorce was finalized at the beginning of 1965. Nevertheless, within 10 months, they managed to reunite, attempting to mend the damage caused by fear, distance, and celebrity. Peace returned for a period, but then tragedy struck. Roy and Claudette, music, were riding motorbikes close to Gallatin, Tennessee, on June 6, 1966. A pickup truck emerged. After being flung, Claudette passed away in Roy's arms an hour later. She was only 24. Roy was hushed by the shock, but he survived with only minor injuries. For months, he canceled shows. He attempted to breathe in a world that felt abruptly empty after burying her in Hendersonville. His song "Too Soon to Know," which carried his sadness, peaked at #3 in the UK 2 months later. Roy recorded "Crawling Back" in October 1965, even prior to her passing. The label encouraged him to write brighter songs that didn't reflect his feelings when it peaked at #46. He frequently broke down during the sessions, and the urge to appear positive conflicted with the sadness he was feeling inside. Even if the public didn't completely hear it at the time, the song turned into a silent admission of what he held. Then came a loss that was nearly impossible to describe. Roy's Hendersonville home was destroyed by fire on September 14, 1968, when he was traveling through England. His kids, Anthony, age 6, and Roy Dwayne, age, music, passed away while they were asleep. Only 3-year-old Wesley made it out alive after being hauled out by his grandparents. In less than an hour, the house was completely destroyed by the fire. Investigators thought that outdated wiring caused an aerosol can to explode. When Roy heard the news from across the seas, his entire being, including his music, broke once more. He struggled to write and speak for a long time, and he was barely able to bear the burden. He sold the property to Johnny Cash following the fire. Telling Roy that only wonderful things would now grow there, Cash planted an orchard across the ashes. Although it was a simple gesture, it came to represent hope. Later, Roy stated that he wished to recall the love rather than the suffering that existed there. By 2008, Barry Gibb had constructed a new residence on the land, which had passed through several owners. Nevertheless, the memory persisted, engraved in Roy's heart in the soil. His physique suffered as a result of the anguish. He started chain smoking, occasionally 2 packs every day. His ulcers, which had been bothering him since 1960, got worse. The stress was eating away at him from the inside, the doctors cautioned. But he continued to perform. When life continued attempting to knock him down, music became the only thing that kept him upright and the only road he could follow. Roy Orbison made a decision that seemed significant as he entered 1965. He left Monument Music Records, which had supported him via singles like "Oh Pretty Woman," and hurried to MGM after they made him an offer of $1 million and discussed film opportunities. Although it sounded like a fresh start, the price was high. Every year, he was required to record 3 whole albums in addition to a number of singles. And the strain forced him to write almost 70 songs in just his first year. While the Beatles and the rest of the British invasion dominated every music radio station, his debut MGM single, "Rideway," barely made it to music 100 on the Billboard chart. In Canada and the UK, his first MGM record peaked at #1, but hardly anyone in America took note. Only 3 of his songs made it to the US Top 40 at the end of his MGM career. The timing around him was sliding away, but his creativity remained alive despite the fact that he had written or co-written 42 of the first 70 music tracks he provided. Then came 1967. During his 14-day trip of Australia, Roy managed to fit 20 shows into that brief time frame. In Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, and Mount Gambier, he performed on stages. He even gave 2 performances at Sydney Stadium in a single day on January 21. However, he was deeply saddened by the loss of his wife, Claudette, in June 1966. His voice was sapped by grief and jet lag. He sounded exhausted and hoarse, according to reviewers. He continued to walk onto every stage and make an effort to offer the audience what they had come for, but every performance drained him of something that he was unable to replenish. He released Walk On in 1968, a year later. Although it was hidden beneath layers of strings he never wanted, many listeners believed it to be one of his most emotive compositions. His voice's purity was overpowered by the luscious, overproduced sound that MGM had imposed. The song peaked at number 53 in Australia, number 39 in the UK, number 93 in Canada, and number 121 in the United States. It began to represent his struggles and to serve as a reminder of music, how frequently his opinions were disregarded in favor of others' interpretations of his music. But life continued on. Roy married Barbara Jacobs in Nashville on March 25, 1969. She was 19. Shortly before losing 2 of his sons in a house fire in September 1968, he had met her. The paparazzi who attended the wedding were more interested in making noise, music, than in comprehending the significance of the occasion. It was referred to as a rebound. They handled it like a show. However, Roy clung to her because she restored a tiny bit of his life's brightness. Later, they had 2 sons, Roy Kelton Jr. and Alexander, and he did everything in his power to protect music, that new family, despite the world's persistent attempts to delve into his personal sorrow. The loneliness increased when he traveled to Nashville for additional MGM sessions later that year. Bob Dylan was even aware of it. Roy hardly talked, as if the weight of everything had driven him inward, according to Dylan, who visited Roy once. Roy recorded with studio musicians rather than intimate friends, and the atmosphere was frequently chilly. He had been forced into a quiet corner where music no longer seemed like the home it once did due to years of pressure, loss, and label control. Then came 1970. In the hopes that the trend might change, Roy published God Love You under MGM. Penny Arcade, Music, which was on the album, became the UK's top song. It was his 3rd number 1 there, demonstrating that Britain was still paying attention to him. However, just 50,000 copies of the record were sold in America. His songs seemed out of place as disco took over radio stations and shops. Years later, however, the CD turned to become a gem for collectors, with some copies fetching hundreds of dollars. However, it was another indication at the time that his relationship with American audiences was waning. He was put to the ultimate test in the ensuing years. Roy had to take a 6-month hiatus from performing after injuring his throat during a strenuous British tour in 1972. He was annoyed by the lack of music, but he used it as motivation to write for the film of the same name In the Middle of the Night, which was nominated for a Golden Globe. The wounds still frightened him. He missed every opportunity for promotion that could have helped music revitalize his career because he was afraid his voice, music, might not come back. He signed with Mercury Records, Music, in 1973 and made an effort to follow the latest fashions. In an attempt to get in touch with changing tastes, he recorded a country rock rendition of Sweet Caroline. However, punk and glam rock were booming. Roy's single peaked at number 104 on Billboard, and names like Lou Reed and David Bowie dominated headlines. About 70,000 copies of the album were sold, which was significantly less than anyone had anticipated. However, this stage made it possible for him to work with other nations in the future, which helped him regain his footing in the 1980s. Then his health deteriorated. Roy experienced severe chest problems in late 1977 while on vacation in Hawaii. Severe coronary artery disease was discovered by doctors. He had triple bypass surgery on January 18, 1978. He tried to get stronger for music months and shed 20 pounds, but he never completely stopped smoking, despite the fact that it almost killed him. Because performing was the one thing he couldn't give up, he went back to the stage earlier than the doctors permitted. Problems arose once more in 1979. He was severely infected during a tour bus accident in Canada. Due to his cardiac issues and ulcers, doctors advised that traveling might be fatal. Most of the warnings he disregarded. He continued to perform, overcame his trepidation, and attempted to adapt to slower timetables. His survival instincts were frequently subordinated to his passion. He published Laminar Flow in 1980. Synthesizers and ambient sounds abound in this odd futuristic record. The public was unsure about how to interpret it. No single made it to the top 100, and it didn't chart. However, the album eventually gained a limited fan base. Some songs were later likened by listeners to the Human League in early Depeche Mode. Even though it wasn't a hit, it demonstrated his courage to try out new sounds long before they became popular. Then, in 1988, everything changed for him once more. Together with Jeff Lynne, George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and Tom Petty, Roy joined the Traveling Wilburys. Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 began as an unintentional recording and evolved into a whole album. He added those soaring harmonies that people had been missing for years, and he adopted the name Lefty Wilbur. Over 2 million copies of Handle with Care were sold, and the album peaked in the top 50. Roy was viewed with new eyes by fans, and artists were appreciative that he had joined their group. It was a rebirth. He immediately went to record Mystery Girl. Only a few weeks after his passing, in January 1989, it was released. On Billboard, You Got It peaked at number 9, his highest ranking since 1964. The album reached number 2 in the UK and number 5 in the US. Over 3 million copies were sold worldwide. For a brief moment, his voice's beauty was remembered by the world in a way that was both joyful and terrible. Roy had been experiencing excruciating chest pains during Wilbur's sessions. He dismissed the pleas of Jeff Lynne and others for assistance. He believed he could overcome this one as well because he had overcome so many others. Despite being debilitated by years of smoking and previous bypass surgery, he continued to work. Despite the indications, his death on December 6, 1988, felt unexpected. After spending the day laughing and playing remote control airplanes with his sons, he passed out in his bathroom at the age of 52. Physicians were unable to bring him back to life. Severe obstructions that had been accumulating for years were discovered during the autopsy. After that, Mystery Girl came out and won him an enormous Grammy. After his passing, he became the only musician since Elvis Presley to simultaneously have 2 albums in the top 5. In 2018, Barbara, his wife, developed a holographic performance using over 200,000 hand-touched frames and safeguarded his catalog. Later, in 2019, his son started the Roy Orbison Legacy Tour, which used a virtual avatar to bring him back to the stage. Fans across the US, UK, and Europe witnessed Roy sing once more on a level that was unthinkable just a few decades ago. His closing comments provide the story's penultimate twist. He discussed the Mystery Girl World Tour's tour plans with Barbara. He was thrilled. He felt prepared. Months prior, doctors had cautioned him that if he didn't alter his way of living, he would be seriously at risk. But he continued. Days before he passed away, he was full of life, full of plans, and full of simple, cozy family moments.